So this is the JBL Pulse 5. Now there are some cosmetic upgrades on this speaker from the Pulse 4, but more importantly, the Pulse 5 is rocking an upgraded speaker setup, which personally I am impressed by because of the Pulse 5's vertical design. Nonetheless, let's see what the Pulse 5 is all about, and let's see how this new speaker setup compares to both the Pulse 4 and Pulse 3. Regarding pricing, the JBL Pulse 5 retails for $250, and I'm going to be straight up, that is a little steep because if sound quality is super important to you, then you're going to want to go with something like the JBL Charge 5. However, the Pulse 5 continues to have one of the best looking and most dynamic light features out there. So if the light feature is very important to you, then the Pulse 5 is a solid choice. Nonetheless, if you want to pick this speaker up, it'll be linked down below. And if you want to further support the channel, check out the merch shelf down below. I've made some shirts and hoodies that look and feel great. And if you've been watching me for a while, you know I can be very particular. So I'll only set my name on something that I'm really proud of. Now first, let's talk about the design of this speaker. The Pulse 5 is a medium-sized vertical speaker, and when it's turned off, it looks like a glass vase. Now, the Pulse 5 has a mostly acrylic body with rubber end caps on each end, and there's also a new slightly elastic loop on the back, which makes taking the speaker on the go with you a little easier, or you can hang it from places. Now, when it comes to the durability of this speaker, after doing various stress tests on this speaker, I found that the acrylic body on the Pulse 5 does a really good job of standing up to scratches, but if you were to drop the speaker from 2 feet up on pavement, you are going to get deep scratches in it. But the good thing is, this acrylic body doesn't shatter easily, and in general, it takes a lot of force to break this acrylic body. Combined with the fact that the Pulse 5 is rocking an IP67 rating, meaning that it's waterproof for up to 30 minutes in 1 meter of water, the Pulse 5 is surprisingly durable. However, I would still recommend that you be gentle with the speaker because the end caps can be a little quick to come loose. But with durability out of the way, let's talk about the light feature. Now, just like before, there are different lighting modes to choose from. However, instead of being stuck with one lighting mode like with both the Pulse 4 and Pulse 3, with the Pulse 5, you can choose your theme, and within the themes, the Pulse 5 will cycle between different lighting styles. Now, I am indifferent about the constantly changing lighting modes, but within the themes, you can deactivate whichever modes you don't like. Whereas with both the Pulse 4 and Pulse 3, they also have a decent amount of styles to choose from, but their light features stick to one mode. Simply put, I feel the light feature on the Pulse 5 is much busier than the one on the Pulse 4 and 3, but when it comes to looks, I feel that all of these light features are equally as dynamic and impressive. But for the best results, you do want to use these speakers indoors or at night, because these light features are just very hard to see during the day. However, one thing that the Pulse 5 does have over both the Pulse 4 and Pulse 3 is that its light feature now has a ground effect to it, because the passive radiator on the bottom also has some LEDs. Now, the main selling point of this speaker is its light feature, but if you want to, you can also deactivate the light feature on this speaker. You can either deactivate the whole thing, or you can deactivate parts of it. Just keep in mind, if you do decide to use this light feature, it is going to take its toll on the battery life. Now, when it comes to battery life, the Pulse 5 has an advertised battery life of 12 hours, just like with the Pulse 4. However, this advertised battery life of 12 hours is with the Pulse 5 playing at 50% volume and with the light feature dimmed down quite a bit. But real-world use with the Pulse 5 playing at 80% volume, which is a decent listening volume for indoor use, and with the light feature turned on, both the Pulse 5 and Pulse 4 are good for about 6 to 7 hours of playback time. However, just keep in mind, battery life on the speaker really varies depending on how loud you're using it and how bright the light feature is. Now, when it comes to charging the speaker, the Pulse 5 charges via a USB-C port on the back, and unfortunately, this is the only port that you'll find on this speaker. Unfortunately, there's no audio jack like with the Pulse 3, and personally, I'm not surprised at all because the Pulse 4 also doesn't have an audio jack. And unfortunately, you can't use the USB-C port on the Pulse 5 as a wired connection, and you can't use it to charge your own devices, like how you can with the USB-C port found on the JBL Extreme 3. Now, when it comes to Bluetooth connectivity, the speaker is using Bluetooth 5.3, but more importantly, the Pulse 5 can be connected to 2 devices at the same time so that you and a friend can both be DJ. The speaker has 0 latency across the board when watching movies or videos on your phone, whether you're using an iPhone or an Android device. But when it comes to audio codecs, the Pulse 5 only has support for SBC, which is very JBL. But now let's talk about sound. Regarding speaker setups, the Pulse 5 has an improved speaker setup over its predecessor because it now has an upward firing woofer, an upward firing tweeter, which is stacked on top of the woofer, and it has a single downward firing passive radiator. Whereas with the Pulse 4, it has a single upward firing woofer and a single downward firing passive radiator, which is actually a little smaller than the passive radiator found on the Pulse 5. And finally, there's a Pulse 3, which has a very different speaker setup. The Pulse 3 has a downward and upwards firing passive radiator, and it has a total of 3 transducers hidden below the fabric portion of the speaker. Now, overall, the Pulse 3 does the best job of evenly covering a large area with music, whereas both the Pulse 5 and Pulse 4, these are better used indoors because they're upward firing speakers. So if you want to get the best sound out of these speakers, you're going to need a ceiling for the sound to bounce off of. But with all that being said, we're going to jump into the sound test. All of these speakers are playing with their stock EQs, and they're all playing at 87% volume. So first off, I'm going to have to point out that the Pulse 3 has the warmest sound signature, whereas the Pulse 5 has the brightest sound signature here. And personally, I'm not surprised that the Pulse 5 has a bright sound signature because most of JBL's newer speakers have all been coming included with a bright stock EQ, probably because of that new tweeter. But the brighter EQ on the Pulse 5 isn't a problem because you can easily just go in and adjust its EQ. Personally, I like to raise the bass by 2 clicks and I lower the highs by 1 click. And this adjustable EQ is something that isn't found on either the Pulse 4 or Pulse 3. But more importantly, the additional tweeter on the Pulse 5 does help the speaker have better instrument separation and sound more open than both the Pulse 4 and Pulse 3, because with the Pulse 5, the woofer handles the mids and the tweeter handles the highs. But so that you can see what I'm talking about, we're going to jump into a demo with the Charge 5, which also has a tweeter and a woofer setup.
That we were meant to be. We kept running from the shadows in the night, realizing it was not worth the fight. Moving on alone was what felt right, 'cause we were never meant to be. Dum dum da dum day. Dum dum da dum day. Dum dum da dum day.
So like you just saw, the woofer handles the mids and the tweeter handles the highs, helping the Pulse 5 to sound more open than the Pulse 4. And to be honest, improved instrument separation on the Pulse 5 is really the only sound performance improvement that you'll find on it over the Pulse 4, because the Pulse 5 gets just as loud as both the Pulse 4 and Pulse 3, and I feel the Pulse 5 has the same amounts of bass as the Pulse 4. But I do feel the Pulse 3 has a little more bass than these other two speakers, simply because it has that warmer EQ and it has an additional passive radiator. Now overall, the Pulse 5 gets decently loud at max volume for indoor use, but for outdoor use it can struggle a bit. And unlike with JBL's larger speakers, like let's say the Extreme 3 or Boombox 3, if you were to use the Pulse 5 while it's plugged in, you're not going to get a performance boost out of it. So overall, sound quality wise, the Pulse 5 does have improved instrument separation over the Pulse 4, making it sound more open. The only drawback is that it does have a slightly brighter sound signature, but that's fine because you can easily fix that. But when it comes to max volume and bass, the Pulse 5 is very similar to the Pulse 4. But more importantly, if you do decide to go with the Pulse 5, I mainly recommend it for indoor use because due to its upward firing woofer and tweeter, you're going to want a ceiling for the sound to bounce off of. But also, I want to point something out about the Pulse 5 that I really dislike, and that's this speaker no longer has any media controls on it, meaning that if you want to adjust the volume or skip your music or pause your music, you're gonna have to do that directly from your phone, and I find this to be very inconvenient, and if not, a little insulting. But now let's talk about pairing the speaker up with other speakers. Now the JBL Pulse 5 is using JBL's Partyboost, meaning that you can pair it up to other JBL Partyboost speakers like either a Boombox 3, a Boombox 2, an Extreme 3, a Charge 5, a Pulse 5, a Pulse 4, a Flip 5, or to a Flip 6, and you can have up to 100 speakers paired together, which is obviously just overkill. Now, if you're going to be mixing and matching speakers, then your speakers are going to automatically play in sync. If you want to get left and right stereo sound going, you're going to need 2 of the exact same speakers. So if you want to get stereo sound going with the Pulse 5, you're going to need another Pulse 5. Unfortunately, if you were to pair the Pulse 5 to a Pulse 4, they're only going to play in sync. Also, keep in mind that you can only pair Partyboost speakers to other Partyboost speakers. If you have any of JBL's older speakers, like let's say a Charge 4 or a Pulse 3 or a Flip 4, which are all using JBL Connect Plus, unfortunately, they will not sync up with your Pulse 5, which is using Partyboost. And also, you cannot pair any of your smaller Partyboost speakers to any of JBL's larger Partybox speakers. Now, even though there is some fragmentation that I feel that you need to look out for, I do feel that if you plan on buying multiple speakers and if you plan on constantly pairing them together, I do feel that JBL is the way to go because Partyboost just works. You just press one button on each speaker, they'll automatically sync up with one another and they'll do so quickly, and skipping is never an issue like with some other speaker pairing protocols out there. So with all that being said, the JBL Pulse 5 is a marginal upgrade over the Pulse 4. Yes, the Pulse 5 has a new tweeter in it, which is going to help it sound more open than the Pulse 4. But when it comes to bass and max volume, the Pulse 5 is very similar to the Pulse 4. And unfortunately, battery life performance on the Pulse 5 remains the same as the Pulse 4. However, if you're looking for a speaker with a dynamic light feature to liven up your living space, the Pulse 5 is one of the best options out there. And thanks to to JBL's expanding Partyboost speaker lineup, you can always expand your Pulse 5 with other speakers. The only thing that I would recommend with the Pulse 5 is that you mainly use it indoors, because if you try to use this speaker outdoors, its upward firing woofer and tweeter is going to struggle to deliver you the best sound. And finally, there's the lack of media controls on this speaker. I just find it to be so inconvenient. If you made it this far, I guess you enjoyed the video, so hit the like button and get subscribed. If you want to pick any of the products up, they'll be linked down below. And if you want to further support the channel, check out the merch. I made some shirts and hoodies that look and feel great. And you know I can be very particular, so I'll only slap my name on something if I'm really proud of it.